But
So it is 2:30 now. We're going to be starting very soon. For those of you just arriving, welcome, welcome. We're going to give it about a minute or two to give people a chance to get here, but please say hello and chat. Don't be shy. We're going to be here to answer all of your questions, and we'll get right into the webinar, but very shortly.
yeah, so maybe for those that are here, we'll probably reiterate this a little bit, but things will be a little bit different as this is a webinar compared to our frequent viewers on the weekly live show. Chat is definitely going to be a little different. It will be pretty heavily moderated, just to warn you. We want to make sure that everyone stays on topic. We're going to have different Q&A periods throughout the webinar. So let's try to stay on topic, but we do have our staff moderating that. I won't be watching open chat all the time. Our moderators will be queuing up relevant questions for those Q&A periods. So I'll have that there, just so you all know the ground rules. Lay that out there.
I mean, at the same time, we're not going to be too big of sticklers, but we do have a lot of topic to cover. Yeah. So we want to just make sure that we keep things moving. And if we go down too deep into any one rabbit hole, we might not surface.
Yeah, exactly.
We might need some cave divers to come and save us. But I think we can, we got quite a few people here now. Say hello in chat. And we will be monitoring chat. Why don't we go ahead and pull up the index, Lisa, and we can give you guys an idea of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. But welcome everyone just joining us. And as I just said, we have those kind of ground rules, but our general index for today on the webinar and how we're going to cover these different topics. And there will be different Q&A breaks in between some of these subjects, and we'll let you know when those are open and working. But this is what it's going to look like. So what are we going to cover?
So we've sort of broken things down into some of the main topics, and I think the thing that we wanted to cover most today is the studio itself.
Yeah.
Okay, and how to get that stream out of your studio and onto the web successfully without failure. So although we are going to cover topics like cameras and lighting and audio, those are all important. We're probably going to focus on the studio-related topics more so today.
Yeah.
So if you do have, camera questions, we'll be able to answer a few of them, but we're not going to go down the camera rabbit hole today. We're just going to make some general recommendations.
Yeah.
But here's, this index will give you sort of an idea of what to expect and the order that we're going to do everything. We will break for questions in between some of these sections.
Yep.
And then if you do stick with us to the end, we'll open it up and do an open-ended Q&A, and we'll be here as long as you guys want to be here to answer as many questions as you may have. So
I just saw one comment in chat there from Stefan saying he's finding the sound a bit weak. Lisa, I don't know if you can boost the audio just a touch, and we'll make sure that everything sounds good.
Now, one of the advantages to having a mixer in the studio, which we will get to a little later in the webinar, is you can make adjustments on the fly.
Exactly.
So I don't have to pull out my microphone and make little adjustments.
Exactly.
So why don't we get going here?
Sure.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. When it comes to a live streaming studio, there's a lot of factors to consider, and there's a lot of preparation that you can do to make sure that you have the best chance of success and to mitigate all of the failure points.
Yeah.
So with that, where do you want to get started today, George?
So there's a lot of things to talk about. For those of you who are used to our studio space, you'll notice that we have pulled back into a little bit of a wider shot because we want to be able to talk about and demonstrate certain things that you can actually see instead of just sort of experience the final product with today's webinar. So hopefully you're going to see a little bit more behind the curtain, which is great. But basically we want to help you shape your live streaming studio to fit whatever the needs might be and give you some ideas on some best practices and things like that. So maybe we could pull up that index once again, Lisa, and we'll basically we're going to break it down into sections. So the first one, we're going to start off with the environment, and that's a pretty big one. It's a good place to start because it might be, in some ways, the biggest.
I think so, yeah. So when you're setting up a live streaming studio, obviously probably the first and most important decision that you're going to make is where are you going to set up?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have space? How is the audio? There's many factors. Now here in this studio, we actually sort of had to tear down a whole section of traditional cubicles in this office. So we inherited this sort of side of this office, and this was a little cubicle village. Now we took down most of the cubicles, and we have still one partition on this wall, but really this environment, although it's not a closed environment, it's an open environment. We've done some things to sort of secure it from sound pollution, from light pollution, and to make it more controlled environment. So maybe you can touch on some of the things we've done there.
Yeah, so because this used to be a cubicle farm, the wall down this side to Dan's right is actually a half-wall, cubicle-style wall. And it's open to a very large office space on the other side. So in order to reduce noise, to reduce light pollution, to do all those different pieces, we use sound blankets and other acoustic paneling in this one. In our other studio that we often use here, we actually went through the full effort, because it's 4 solid walls and a closable door and all those things. We went through the effort of actually doing I guess essentially a proper engineering study on the room and its acoustics, and designed specific custom sound deadening panels strategically hung on the walls in order to do exactly what they're meant to do, to make sure that it's very quiet.
But in this studio now, it is pretty quiet in here.
It is,
and it's gotten a little more quiet since we put the audio blankets up. And actually, these aren't, in fact, the high-end audio blankets that you would purchase for film production. These are actually just moving blankets, which
it's about the density, right?
Exactly. These are quilted, so really all you're doing is you're absorbing some of the sound, and we're also controlling some of the light spill from the other side of this partition. Now, as far as audio dampening, we also have these panels here, which we've put along the sidewall. So these, what can you tell me about these panels, George?
Well, these are basically just a dense foam, really, and so they're going to absorb a lot of it, and just make
turn
sure
around,
that
you can kind of see the other side, and this is what's inside them, is just a dense foam, and then they're basically a carpeted foam.
Exactly, and these can be hung on the wall, or on the ceiling if you need to, different things like that, in order to just make sure that the sound isn't bouncing around. And that's a critical piece, to deaden it, make sure that you're just not getting weird reflections, and of course, making sure you can control the tone and frequency of different noise.
Now, why is sound? It seems like we're talking about sound first, and this subtopic that we're on right now is choosing the environment for your stream. So is that the most important thing?
I think so, because you have to start with that environment. So as we were saying, we have this semi-open thing. In a perfect world, I think Dan and I would both prefer to have solid 4 walls, because it would give us more control. The downside to that is that, I guess as a subset of environment, is the physical dimensions of the studio. Where we are, and just to illustrate this, I'm going to walk to the back, but this is about 30 feet long and about only 12 feet wide. So when I walk all the way to the back and stand here,
you're getting pretty you're getting pretty small back there.
But one of the things that this does, if I go hide behind all these Pearl mini boxes, one of the things that this allows us to do is gives us a lot more depth of field with the cameras. We can play with things a lot better. We don't need a lot of width, but depth is very important.
Yeah, depth is certainly one of the most important things. Now, one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen some people set up in their mini studios is to put their subject right against a wall. Now, you can make that work, but the problem is when you put someone right against the wall, you tend to get shadows, number one, off of their...
That's going to come up lighting later.
You tend to get some audio issues having a wall right behind you. If you have a shotgun mic or a microphone pointed, it's going to be catching all of the echo off of that wall. The other thing is that when you're right up against a wall, it's harder to use a telephoto lens and get zoomed in. And we'll talk about focal length in a little while, but in many cases, if you want your subject to look great on camera, something with like a focal length of like 50 millimeters or 80 millimeters on your lens is going to generally just make your talent look better on camera than a big wide lens up close will.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's where, you know, the depth of your studio space and the amount of Z-axis space that you have is going to make a huge difference.
Yeah.
It also gives you the ability to create some lighting zones, which we'll touch on a bit later.
Yeah, when we get to lighting. Yeah, where our desk is positioned here is only about halfway in our total studio space here. So this is about halfway. The camera.
I mean, I can walk up towards the camera to give some idea as well, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, you're a fair bit forward there from where we are.
And if I zoom the camera out even further, you'll get a better sense of scale. But you know, we don't actually have a lot of space on either side of the desk, but in terms of depth, we have lots. And what happens is when we zoom the camera in and get a nice tight shot.
And when normally we would do the seated position here, but yeah, we can play with those quite a bit. But the importance is that those dimensions gives us flexibility, and that allows you to change your set a little bit more. Dan was mentioning pros and cons of being up against a wall. You know, having that depth is more controllable both for sound, lighting, playing with the zoom and framing of the camera. All these kind of different elements are pretty important about the environment. Some of the other things about the environment, I mentioned the desk. That can be very important as well, believe it or not, for a lot of reasons. One, you want something that's not going to bounce a lot of sound, just like walls and everything else. But you also don't want anything that if someone happens to bump into it is going to move, rattle, make noise, reflect light in bad ways, all kinds of little pieces like that. This is a workbench that we got from a hardware store, basically.
Yeah, this is like a solid, very solid, what's it called, a gladiator bench.
Yeah, it's a solid wood top with very solid metal legs, which are adjustable for height, so we can change the height if we need to. But, I mean, it weighs a ton. You're not going to move this by bumping into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally when we're talking about studio environment, safety is actually something to think about.
Yeah.
When you try to fit too many things, you've got light stands, mic stands, desk, cabling, all of these things, and you try to squeeze them all into a smaller room, it starts to become hard to move around in that space, and it becomes dangerous because things get tipped over, cords tripping. One of the things that we do here in this studio is we make sure to use, and George has it right here, gaffer tape. And actually that roll is getting pretty low, so we'll have to get some more. But gaff tape is huge.
I would, although you can definitely use duct tape, I would recommend actual gaff tape because it leaves less residue behind.
Yeah. Well, it's also safe to use on walls, and you know, you're not going to leave the tape behind. It's not going to peel your paint off.
You can take it off again, but it still does the job for tying down all your cables. So cable management in any environment is important, and being able to tape everything down to make sure people aren't tripping. You can get you know, the actual rubber or plastic cord conduits, which can also be a good option. But this is a quick and easy. If you move things a lot, using gaff tape is a great.
And I can just show a shot here if we want to go to the B cam. But we have some cables in this studio that aren't taped down right now. That's because, you know, we're doing some things on the fly here. But our permanent fixed cables here. At least, can we go to camera B for just a moment? You'll see that the cables that are always going to be there, we have them taped down to the floor.
Yeah, so those are basically the permanent run ones. For example, the one that runs to the shotgun microphone that is up above, and we'll talk about audio options a little more in another section. But you know, and obviously lighting, power, things like that is all run in sort of a more permanent way, and making sure that it's tied down.
Now, another option, if you don't want to use gaff tape, is you can use something like these. These are just channels for your cables.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of these ones actually because they're very stiff and they're hard to get the cables into. Yeah. But I've seen the larger ones that have like
super professional multi-part ones. Those ones are great, but they're not cheap. So you know, how many cables do you realistically need to run through them?
Now we have a good question actually coming in here from Stefan. Stefan's asking, what about soundproofing the flooring? Like which kind of flooring? So, I mean, a carpeted floor certainly is going to work well.
Yeah, especially if it has a carpet pad underlay, that's going to help. This is just commercial carpet on concrete floor, and it's very effective. Low pile, but it's still very effective just for that. So again, anything that's just going to help reduce, that noise from bouncing around is going to help and just deaden it a little bit. So I mean, even just think about it in your house, right? The difference between an empty room with hardwood floors versus, you put a throw rug or an actual wall-to-wall carpet in there. It makes a world of difference in terms of noise just in your own home. The same kind of thing can apply in a studio with the addition of walls and ceiling sometimes. Here we have a drop ceiling with tiles, so it's actually not bad at deadening it already because they are supposed to be acoustic-ish tiles. But a drop ceiling usually means that it's not actually a hard surface, so things work a little bit better. But sometimes, if you do have a hard ceiling, you might want to put some blankets on.
Yeah, you could put a blanket. I think we had one before. But.
Yeah, and you can do that baffling where it's kind of just in rows tucked up and just making sure that flat surfaces that don't absorb are the bad thing.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Yeah. So I think that's probably covers it for environment. If you have any questions about environment, we are going to open up some Q&A, but we want to cover a couple more things first. So let's jump right into the next section we wanted to talk about today, and that is cameras.
Cameras, the big one.
Everyone's favorite thing to talk about. Now, in the context of our conversation today, we're talking about building something fail-proof, building a fixture studio, something that is, probably you have set up 24/7, a place where you can go and that...
Flip a switch and everything's on.
Yes, that's, in a perfect world, that's the idea, is you walk in and you're ready to go. So when it comes to cameras, what, in your opinion, George, are some of the biggest factors or sort of the methodology to choosing a camera for a fail-proof studio?
Yeah, so obviously reliability is a big one. And, there's a lot of different camera types out there, and we get a lot of comments from different customers and users on which ones they use, which ones they prefer, which ones they should use. We have a few selections, obviously. Those who are familiar with our normal setup, we have the Canon C100 and the Sony Alpha A6300 that we use typically as very multi-purpose cameras in general. If I was to choose one of these cameras to be my studio camera, it would be the C100. That goes without saying. And there's good reasons for that. It is, a cinema style camera. And that's always going to be your overall best choice. Now, if you can't spend the budget to do a $5,000–6,000 camera, then the secondary ones I would look at would be more of the Handycam style. This is the Canon XA10. Again, you're talking about something that is designed to run for long periods of time without having to be powered down, or they're just built for video. I mean, that's the difference. It's built for video. Yeah. I will say that of these particular Canon models, these are not my personal favorite because of the physical design of the HDMI port. It's a mini HDMI.
Maybe we could get a close-up of that. I'll come over to the other camera here.
Everything about the XA10, or we have the G20, which is basically the same camera with some slight audio variances. But with both of these, they use the same body and the same physical output type. So this is sort of a thing to watch for and consider when looking in shopping for a camera, is a mini or micro HDMI output port. These Canons use a mini, is going to be less durable. So if your wires are being plugged and unplugged frequently, the durability is going to degrade over time. And that's not great. The position of this one, it's hard to describe. Yeah, it's hard to describe without getting really close on it here.
I'm going to get this one off the sticks and I'll come right over and we'll get a closer view here.
We're going to go a little dynamic here. So with these guys, basically that mini HDMI is horizontal to the rest of the camera, and is right on the edge, and so that a cable coming out of it actually puts a lot of leverage downwards against the body of the camera. We have had quite a few of these, the G20s in particular, break at the HDMI point because of the weakness of this connector. The last thing you want is to spend $1,000 to $1,500 on a camera only to have an HDMI connector break. So when you're looking and shopping for a camera, I think you really want to look at cameras that have full-size HDMI connectors, or in a perfect world, SDI, because of the durability of those cameras. The C100 has another advantage beyond having a full-size HDMI connector. It also has a rear output instead of on the side. It's on the rear and comes straight out more vertically. So the load is not in a place where the connector is under as much stress. And so that's an important point to look at, is this is something that can be set up all the time. You may potentially be running very heavy cables. Like, do you have a loose HDMI cable that we typically use? I guess you could unplug that one. If you look at the gauge of this cable, this is a thick HDMI cable. This has a lot of weight to it. And so, you want to make sure that this is going to provide, that the camera can support this without taking too much load and potentially damaging the equipment. At the same time, this is, I think, a 100-foot cable or something like that. You might be using 100-plus foot cables. So, taking that in consideration. So again, in a perfect world, you might use SDI instead because of the durability. Locking connectors, longer cable runs with lower gauge cable.
Aren't they more affordable cables as well?
They can
in many
be
cases?
for longer runs,
Yeah.
definitely. The affordability is there. So again, when you step into an SDI camera, like the C100 doesn't have SDI. I think you have to go to 300 to get SDI. So you're talking about almost doubling the price of your camera in many cases to go to SDI. So maybe it's not within your budget. If it is, I would strongly consider it. If it's not, at least look at full-size connectors and making sure that they're in a physical location on the camera, preferably on the back, where they're not going to create a load issue.
Now, can we talk about maybe some, well, let's talk about two things. One, I had this here. This is my Canon 5D DSLR. I've had this for almost 10 years.
Yep.
Great camera. It shoots amazing video.
Shoot pictures with.
Terrible live streaming camera. And the reason for that is that with many cameras, the recording format is not always the same as the HDMI output format. So although this camera will shoot full HD, 30 frames a second, as soon as you try to use it for live streaming, it's terrible because the output is like 720 by 480, and it uses, again, a micro HDMI connector, and finally, it is not a clean output. So the menus and overlays of the camera get put onto that signal. So it's pretty much useless. The other thing is it has the firmware in this camera has it turn off automatically so that battery saving features.
And that's an important thing with DSLRs. We get this question all the time, hey, will my Canon Rebel T6i be a great choice for a live streaming studio camera? No, it won't be. I mean, I can't really put it any more plainly than that. It's not. DSLRs, like you mentioned with this one, and pretty much any DSLR that has a mirror. Mirrorless cameras like the A6300 is a different story.
That's a bit better.
Yeah. But any camera that has a mirror for its own protection, for heat protection, will lift that mirror and turn itself off every 20, 30 minutes. So if you wanted to do a 1 hour or 2 hour live stream, you can't be going and turning your camera back on. Now, there are some you can load third-party firmware to disable all that.
Yeah, you can get Magic Lantern firmware here,
but
and that gives you some flexibility. But
exactly.
I don't want to have to run hacked firmware on my cameras just to make them work.
We're talking today about bulletproof stability, right? And if you're using hacky methods to achieve this camera you just happen to have instead of going and buying this, because at the end of the day, in a studio, is that going to really give you anything better significantly than this?
Yeah. I mean,
in a studio where you can control all of the environment.
In such a controlled environment, something like this, you can perform really well if you light properly, and
Exactly.
you know, you don't need all the dynamic range if you have good lighting and a good set and you
Outside,
take care of your
where
environment.
you need to do things on the fly, absolutely, a DSLR is going to be more flexible, and I can understand that. But in a studio environment, it just doesn't make sense for all those reasons we
Now,
outlined.
Stefan was asking about, you know, what about more budget-friendly options? So could we look at something like a PTZ camera?
Well, I mean, a PTZ camera is more expensive than this, first of all. Not in all cases, but in many cases. PTZ cameras can be great options if you're mounting them permanently.
And if we go to picture-in-picture here, I can actually show you our Epiphan PTZ camera. It's called the Lumio. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what a PTZ camera is, what is a PTZ camera, George?
So the PTZ stands for pan tilt zoom, but essentially it is a camera base with a series of motors to change the pan, the tilt, and the zoom. Honestly, when you break the acronym down, it's pretty self-explanatory. The nice part is you can remotely control the PTZ functions. So it means that you can mount it in one place and control where it is. You don't necessarily have to move the tripod around to do that. So you can get some pretty precise positioning, even if the camera has to be mounted in an awkward space. Typically, their optics is pretty good. Ours, the Lumio that we sell, the optics are actually very good for low light, which isn't always the case on all PTZ cameras. Beyond that, it's a fairly average camera. The nice part is that it does have SDI. One downside is that it does not have any audio functionality. There are PTZ cameras that do. This one does not, and there are many that do not. So you do have to take that into consideration. You know, what's your audio plan? And we're going to dive into that more in a second. But PTZ cameras can be great options, I think. And again, it depends on your budget. I mean, we retail in the U.S. the Lumio for about $1,500. Well, this is cheaper. So you know, am I any farther ahead with the PTZ camera than I am with an XA10?
Depends on your needs, I guess.
Yeah,
with the
there's pros
PTZ
and
camera,
cons.
one of the advantages is you do get a wireless remote, so you can do your tilt and your zoom without having to walk over to the camera. Right?
Exactly.
If
And
it's just you.
For me, I think the number one thing in favor of PTZ cameras, for myself, is of all cameras, they are by far the ones that are designed to be permanently left on the most. I mean, even handy cams aren't really designed to be left permanently
24/7, yeah.
A PTZ camera is. They're designed to just run forever. So if that's your environment where you're anticipating leaving things running plugged in all the time, PTZ cameras can be very good options. That's why they're used as conferencing cameras in meeting rooms and everything else. So they can be great for that. The audio is the only sometimes thing that we can.
So with that, I think, one quick question Mitch was asking about the Lumio, does it have standard HDMI as well as SDI?
So it has a DVI output that can be adapted just with a simple short adapter to HDMI. So it can be DVI or HDMI. Again, it has no audio, so other than needing an adapter, it works fine.
And we'll get to audio in a moment. We will be getting to that, so save your audio questions. But one consideration while we are talking about cameras, you did mention audio. I guess it's a question of audio path. Is your audio path going through your camera, or are you doing something like what we're doing and you're going from a microphone into a mixer and taking audio as a separate path from your video path?
Yeah, and we'll dive into that more, but again, the considerations there, something like an XA10 or a C100 has XLR inputs on the camera, so you can run lavs like we're wearing now or microphones directly off of that. A PTZ camera like the Lumio doesn't have any audio whatsoever, so you have to go a separate path. So those are definitely considerations. One of the other things we wanted to look at, since we were playing with two cameras while we were talking there, we're using two cameras. We don't always in this studio. But do you need two cameras?
I think in many cases, It depends on your content, obviously. We were able to benefit from having 2 cameras just now because we were able to zoom in and show something a little closer and find some details in what we're seeing. If that's not necessary, maybe you can get away with 1 camera, right? And I would say certainly having fewer cameras simplifies things, right? It's fewer failure points. And when we're talking about trying to create a studio setup that is failure resistant, having 1 camera is probably more reliable. Maybe you still have 2 cameras, but the second one is a backup.
Right.
So
we should always have backups for everything, ideally, because things can happen. But yes, a single static camera shot is always going to be the simplest and most fail-proof way of doing things. It's not as fun, it's not as flashy, but if we're talking about pure reliability being number 1, we take into consideration all those different things. If I break down everything we just talked about, if I had to choose, again, out of everything that we had to do, if I had the budget, I might take something like a Canon C300 to have SDI as a single static camera shot, but as a backup to save a little bit of money, I might use something like the C100 or something similar that's designed for that kind of a thing. And maybe as a string below that, I would probably take a PTZ camera.
Right. Okay. Well, with that, let's move things along. We don't want to spend too much time on cameras.
Yeah. Now, this is a big one.
What are we talking about next? Oh, lighting.
Lighting's a big one. And this is a big one where I will fully admit my ignorance and lack of expertise on lighting. That's just not my forte.
I mean, a lot of lighting, George, is trial and error, right?
Okay.
And trusting your eyes. And in any studio, you're working with the constraints of your environment. We actually have some huge windows back here, but we have covered it with photographic paper so that we can control the lighting in this environment. Now, another option could be to actually use those windows and use them as a light source.
However, shooting into them is probably a bad idea.
Yeah, in that case, you wouldn't want to be shooting into the windows. You'd want to have the studio turned around the other way and use the windows as a light source.
Yeah.
But in any studio environment, the first thing to make lighting decisions is the environment itself. Where are your windows? Is the lighting going to change over time? If you are using a space that has large windows, those windows are going to provide different light at different times of day and with different weather conditions.
There's also a problem for noise, going back to some of the environment things, but
that is absolutely true as well. So, I mean, in a perfect world scenario, probably a no-window studio would be ideal. But realizing that isn't always the case. If you do have windows, it's about trying to use them.
And no one wants to live in a cave, so.
No, exactly.
So you mentioned, we were talking about the length of this. What advantage to the length of this studio with the different lighting setups we have here do we really have?
Well, the advantage here for us with the added depth is that we can have lighting zones. So in a moment, we'll probably talk about 3-point lighting setups. In this studio, we have actually a 7-point lighting setup. So it means we have lights for here at the desk. It means we have backlights, which help to separate us from the background, and it means we can also have a lighting zone for the background itself.
The mood lighting.
The mood lighting, the set deck. How are you going to make your studio actually look nice on camera?
Well, the interesting part is that if people watching us, they see that background and they see it as kind of a little bit of a rainbow. When I look at it, it's just gray, basically, because it's just gray paper as a backdrop. But because of the lighting, we can play with a little bit of trickery the way the cameras see the light.
Exactly.
And that definitely gives us some advantage.
So let's talk about, first of all, light placement. I'll do just a quick diagram here, but I mean, many of you are probably familiar with 3-point lighting setups.
Yeah, so that would be the simplest and most effective for the simplicity of it, right?
Now here's your subject, George. Let's give him a beard.
Okay, all right.
Okay, and let's say your camera is right down here. Can we see that okay? Yeah. I can zoom this in a bit. Why don't I zoom this in a little?
In a little bit.
Make it a little easier to see.
We moved with that positioning a bit, so.
There we go.
That's probably about right. Yeah, all right.
So with your subject here, here's your camera. Typically in a 3-point lighting setup, you will have what's known as your key light, and your key light would go off at about a 45-degree angle from your subject, okay? And then you have what's called a fill light, which typically you would want to have a little further away. The fill light is usually not as prominent.
Okay.
Your key light is sort of it's to imitate a light source. So it could look like it's a window or something that's providing the light. Your fill light is just meant to fill in the shadows on the other side of the face. And then one of the most important lights is actually your backlight. And your backlight goes as much as possible right behind and higher than your subject. And what that's going to do is create a nice sort of rim of light over the back of their head, and it's going to actually help separate them from the background. Now, if you see, I actually have a backlight behind me right now. It's in the shot, but you typically don't want to see your backlight in the shot. So what you do is you take your backlight and you put it on a stand higher or on an arm up behind your subject.
Okay.
So in this environment, we're able to, because we're fortunate enough to have enough space, we have our key light over here, we have our fill light over here, and we have two backlights.
Yeah, two
and we're actually able to use some color gels on our backlight. So we have a blue backlight here, and we have a warmer orange backlight over here. And what that does is, again, create some separation and some contour into the shape of the light. Now, if we go all the way back, we have sort of a warm backlight. Why don't I sneak it out around the corner so people can see it?
So we have a warm backlight that was tucked around the corner here. Again, throwing some of that color up onto our backdrop. We have another one on the floor down here that has some blue gels on it.
This is actually a softbox.
Yeah, and it's just throwing some light onto our set pieces, in that case the Pearl Mini boxes. We have another backlight behind this rack that also has a blue gel that's throwing some more light up onto the backdrop there, and making sure that this rack of more set pieces stands out more because there's light behind it.
Right.
If there wasn't, it would just blend in.
Yeah, when you don't use backlights, what happens is your subject just kind of melts into the background. Right. By creating a backlight, you actually create the shape and contour of their face. It helps to create a more 3D effect to your image. It's going to look way better on camera. Now, realizing that, maybe not everyone can afford or has the budget for 7 lights or even the space.
Right.
You make do with what you have. Maybe your window is your key light, and then you use a fill light. Yeah. Maybe your window is your key light and you use a reflector to help provide a reflector is really inexpensive. Now, if you are going to invest in lights, we can make some recommendations there as well. So what do we have here in the studio, George?
So we primarily, not entirely, but primarily we are using LED panel lights. Not all of them are. Some of them are a bit different.
But I would say my favorite lights are actually these ones. And you know what? I'm going to pan the camera again. So these are our Falconized LED light panels. And with these, it's actually a very slim profile. It's a soft light, so there's a lot of diffusion on the light panel itself. It's LED powered, of course, so this isn't hot.
That's a big one.
It's not warming up our studio at all. It's not causing us to sweat. These are also bicolor, which means there's an adjustment on the back. And you'll see right now, I have the light set to 5600 Kelvin, or daylight temperature, which is what our camera is set to. If I adjust this down, you'll see it starts to become warmer. So the idea is, for your key and your fill light, you want them to be matched, and you want them to be matched with your camera. So if you have a lot of windows, you want to set your cameras to daylight.
Right.
If you maybe are trying to match to some incandescent lights in your space, you would want to warm those up in the 3000 Kelvin range.
Right.
So, having that bicolor adjustment is nice. Now, not all LEDs have that. No. Back here, if you look at these LED panels,
this one.
This one is a much more affordable LED. It's more traditional. You see it's got sort of the grid. It might be hard to see on camera, but there's a grid of lights. I think probably 300 little bulbs in here.
Yeah.
And in order to do color adjustments on these, we just use these plastic gels. So it's just a kit. It'll come with, a couple different colored gels. You can get, this is a warmer gel. You can obviously get a cool blue gel. Right now with the gel out, it just looks like daylight. The other thing you can do with LED panels is to use these type of gels as well.
And that's just basically colored film.
And this is just called a leaf filter, and you can get these in any color. But really the most important two are CTB and CTO, which are the blue and orange gels. And these will, help you adjust daylight balance bulbs to tungsten or vice versa. So that's how you can, really take an existing light and make it what you need it to be.
Yeah, I think so. The LEDs we mentioned there a little bit, because their LEDs don't output a lot of heat. That's great for a lot of reasons, especially for your talent's sanity. But it also consumes a lot less electricity.
Yeah.
Many of the old school traditional lights, because they generate so much heat, in order to keep themselves cool, they have fans in them, which generate noise,
Right.
which we don't want. So we definitely want, to control noise, control heat, but get the lighting. And I think one of the coolest things about LEDs, especially like these panel lights, because you can adjust them, they're a little bit more flexible without using gels if you invest in the better LED panel lights. So smaller, cooler, quieter, and in some cases
No bulbs to replace. I mean,
Right. They're going to last for.
if we want to talk about being fail-proof,
That's the way to go.
light bulbs do go out. So if you're using
sure.
incandescent lights, you could have a light bulb issue.
I mean,
right
even bad
before.
LEDs are going to give you 50,000 hours of runtime, right? And good LEDs that you're going to invest in these kind of lights are probably going to give you much more than that.
Now, speaking of good LEDs, if you want to look at a measurable statistic regarding the quality of light, what you want to look for is CRI. It's basically a rating that goes up to 100, and it measures the quality of the light. So is your 5600 Kelvin actually 5600 Kelvin, or is it, tinted? Does it have a green bias, or does it have, maybe a pink bias? So what you want to, when you're buying your lights, you want to look for the CRI rating, and you're looking for something that's probably 95 or higher is going to be very high quality. If you're getting a cheaper LED panel, you might find something in the low 80s. Your skin tones, however, will not look as good with lower quality lights. So, you kind of get what you pay for in many cases, but you can also use gels to take a less expensive light and get a better result.
Yeah. Now, stands for lighting is probably maybe not quite as important as, say, tripods for a camera, but are definitely still important, coming back to that safety issue. You want to make sure things are stable. So, you probably want to invest in something a little more durable.
And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. I mean, these Falcon
nice,
stands, they're super light, by the way. They have, extending sections. There's an air cushion as well. Right. So if you accidentally turn this, it's not going to crash down. It's going to slowly, sort of, the hydraulic air pressure in there will sort of slowly move it down.
But they're also nice big tubing, which means that they're just going to be more stable. Not necessarily stronger if you were to try and break it over your knee, but it's going to, with only the weight of a light, which is not much, they're going to be more stable. So again, putting those extra 10, 20 bucks here and there into some slightly better light stands, I think is well worth the money in case someone trips over them or whatever. We have some cheaper stands in our other studio that drive me crazy because you can put something on an angle and the whole or too high and the whole thing wants to fall over because it just doesn't have the stability.
Another option that you can do is to get some sandbags. Pretty common. You can get them for really inexpensive. You put them at the base of your stand. It's going to stop the stand from tipping over. We really should probably have sandbags here in this studio, but we do have the space where we're not tripping over things, and we've got good stands, so we're good. But I would like us to maybe get some sandbags as well as one option.
Joining the health and safety committee now?
Yes. Yes.
All right.
Now we are going to open things up to Q&A now. We have covered quite a few things, so if you have any questions about anything we've talked about so far, now's the time.
So, environment, cameras, lighting. Open Q&A, guys. So I see Stefan there saying maybe color, temperature, and white balance.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. Color, temperature, and white balance are... color temperature is measured in Kelvin, and on your camera, it is kind of the same thing as white balance. So when you go on your camera and you choose an automatic white balance setting, maybe you're choosing daylight, or maybe you're choosing shade, or maybe you're choosing the light bulb setting, which is typically incandescent light. What you're really deciding is the Kelvin rating of your white balance on your camera. Now, when you get up to 55, 5600 Kelvin, you're balanced to daylight. And that's actually what we're using here in the studio right now. If you have windows, 9 times out of 10, that's what you're going to be setting your lights and your camera to, because you want the light in your studio to match the light that's coming in from those windows. If you don't do that, what ends up happening is you get a mix of color temperature light, which causes all kinds of bad effects. It's not going to look good on camera. The other thing is, if you have, like, you know, I see in some studios there's pot lights.
Yeah.
That's the enemy. You don't want pot lights. Take, typically they're very warm, so they're like yellow or sort of an orangey color. You're going to want to take some...
and they're not calibrated. They're just whatever bulbs you put in there. They can differ.
Oh, sure, yeah. So what you want to do actually is you want to cover those pot lights with, you know, some... you can get like a black foil or anything really. Just tape over them so that you're not contaminating your light with different color temperatures. In terms of setting your camera's white balance, I mean...
It varies by camera.
Yeah.
There's obviously your cheapest consumer grade handycams. They're not going to do it by Kelvin. They're going to have settings for daylight, cloudy, that kind of stuff. They're supposed to translate to those Kelvin settings, and they roughly do. But that is something to look at is, you know, the more professional cameras are going to actually have that calibrated Kelvin measurement. And that's, especially if you're talking about light panels that can also do that, that makes your life so much easier. Yeah, I mean, we play around with it a lot, right? Because sometimes you want to make minor adjustments to that just based on the subjects. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe, you know, if we're using a particular white balance and things like that for us, we might look a little pasty. I mean, you know, maybe we need to put a little color in there. And playing with lighting can actually do that without having to use makeup, which is kind of nice. But yeah, but that one's a good subject that maybe takes more to unpack.
Yeah, in general, the quick and dirty, Stefan, is you want your color temperatures of all the light in your studio to match. If you want to just have a very fail-proof setup, all of your lights are set at the same color temperature, probably daylight, and then your camera is set to that as well. That's the sort of fail-proof way to do it. Now, sometimes maybe that color temperature has to be set to incandescent. Maybe you have bulbs, like warm bulbs, that you can't turn off in your studio. In that case, you want to match all of your lights to a warmer color temperature.
Or like we do, some of our other lights here that we use the gels on, some of those are compact fluorescents. So we know we can't control their temperature, so we're using them as, you know, background lights with gels on them because we're using them for color. We don't really care.
A couple more comments coming in here. Tim Trott Productions saying gym weights are great for lights. Yes, they are. If you don't have a sandbag, you could put something like a dumbbell at the bottom of your light stand. It's going to stop it from tipping over.
This one Saul had was a good one as well. Different lighting options for larger group interviews. Again, that depends on the size of the set, obviously, but I think... So when we were talking about the different points of lighting, right, a 3-point lighting setup for a larger set and a larger group is probably not going to be sufficient. You probably need to expand that out a little more.
Yeah, so my question to you, Saul, would be, what is the setup of this larger group? Are they all, you know, sort of in one line facing the camera, or are they on opposite sides of a table, for instance? Are
they angled in like you see so many stage interviews?
Yeah, I would say in general, if you have more people to light, you're going to need to get your lights further away. You don't want your light to be close on a large group because his face is going to shadow on my face. Usually the sort of the basic rule is get your light further away, get it higher. That's going to help. And if you can have, you know, one light for one side of the table, one light for the other side of the table, and maybe a third one. Another option you can do that's kind of a hack is to put a light right next to your camera, okay? And just shine it in the same direction that your camera sees, or even right above your camera would even probably be better. Right. And that way, just everything your camera sees has light on it, right?
Now, them being further away means you probably need larger, more powerful lights because you got to throw light a longer way.
Yeah, or you have to adjust the exposure on your camera to compensate. So, as far as trying to light larger groups, again, a huge bank of windows can help you quite a lot in that kind of a scenario. So try to take advantage of the space you have. I hope that answers your question a little bit, Saul.
Okay. So I think we'll close that brief Q&A. We'll have some other ones later on, guys, as we go through these next topics. The next one is a really big one, and kind of wish I had Matt to step in my place on this one as well. But the next one is audio, and that is a monster of a topic when it comes to studio.
But let's take a step back, okay? Let's not get too deep into the rabbit holes of audio, the audiophile perspective. Let's look at reliability first.
Right.
So in terms of trying to have a reliable audio path for your stream, what factors come into play, George?
A lot. I mean, reliability is knowing your environment is a big one. You know, if you're going to use wireless audio like we are, is there any potential sources of wireless interference that's going to be an issue, or is the dimensions of the space not conducive to using wireless technologies? You know, that's one consideration. On the flip side, from a reliability standpoint, if you're going to use something like this shotgun mic that we have up here, which is running XLR into our mixer, do we have anything that might cause grounding noise on that cable? Actually, this happened not long ago in one of our weekly live shows where we had actually placed the power brick from a laptop sitting on our producer's table where Lisa's sitting right now. It had been moved and set on top of the XLR cable coming from this shotgun mic, and that generated a huge buzzing noise in the audio. So reliability-wise, you've got to look at the physical paths of some of these things, especially with XLR cables, making sure there's no potential sources of grounding noise interference.
Yeah, we've had some issues actually recently in this studio with power cables being too close to XLR cables and getting that crosstalk over the cable run.
Grounding can be a serious issue, and even geographically, I mean, luckily here in Canada, our power is pretty clean, but there are places in the world where inherently the power is so dirty coming from the mains that it's just full of noise, and that can be a harder environment to control. But you know, you can certainly find ways to do it. It takes a little bit of trial and error. Make sure, you know, if audio cables run this way, try and run the power that way, you know, that kind of thing. And make sure they're not just all bundled together tight and running in one channel.
That's a really good tip. Let's talk about though what you do in a more noisy environment. Maybe you can't control, maybe you don't have the dampening, maybe you don't have the audio blankets, maybe you just can't control that one sort of vent that's off to the side. In those cases, I think what you want to do is you want to get your mic as close to your subject as possible so that you can lower the noise floor. And what that means is basically you're reducing the volume basically on your microphone so that by having the mic closer to your subject, you're going to reduce the overall noise in the room.
And I think to that, you know, we're wearing the wireless lav mics today. We don't normally do that, but today, because we were going to be moving around, we wanted to do that. There's a reason why they're popular, and it's not just because they kind of disappear. It's because of what they do. You know, they don't pick up as much ambient noise because they're so close to the subject, and you know that has big advantages. You know, if there's a reason why every talk show guest wears one, right? If they were sitting on that set, there'd be so much noise.
And speaking of talk shows, in many cases they even have a backup mic right on the table in front of them, right? And that is, you know, you can't get much closer than that. Now, of course, you may not want to see a big cumbersome mic in your shot.
I think sometimes they use that for prop as much as anything.
Exactly.
But yeah, it is there as a good backup, and maybe to just help fill in the sound a little bit at a lower level. So
now we talked about earlier sending your audio through the camera, which is definitely an option. On something like this, the XA10, you have two XLR ports, so this makes a great way to very quickly and easily get audio paired with your video source and you know, make sure that your audio is in sync and all together with your video. And of course you can do some basic levels control with the gain right here on the side. However, in many cases that may not be the best option. If you have more than two microphones, for example,
not a good choice.
this can only do two. The other thing is if you want to make fine-tune adjustments to audio levels on the fly, these little tiny, I almost need to go to the other camera for a second to show this, but you know, Let's see
we'll try
here.
to adjust things a little bit.
You know,
Yeah. Well,
let's take a look here. These little tiny dials, like
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see, but like that's really hard to make adjustments with on the fly.
Yeah.
I'm like having to use my fingernail almost to do it. That's not a realistic option in a case where you have 3 or 4 people mic'd up and you need to reduce someone's volume quickly.
So there's a lot of reasons, and a lot of good reasons, to use a mixer. It doesn't have to be a huge mixer. It could be a simple 4-channel mixer, but there's a lot of reasons to use a mixer. Now we use one here in our studio. Even when we're only using the single shotgun mic, we use everything through the mixer, because sometimes we might want to mix in a little bit of audio from another source, maybe some intro music or outro music or something like that. We can just plug in an iPod to the mixer and run the audio that way. So Dan's going to sneak behind Lisa here a little bit and try and give you a little bit of a behind the scenes of our current audio setup. As we mentioned today, we're wearing lavs. Normally we don't here in this studio. But the nice part is that we didn't have to disconnect our normal day-to-day shotgun mic. We left everything plugged in. We just muted that channel, plugged the lavs in, made sure our levels were good, which those of you who joined early know that audio was a little low, and all we had to do is just give a little bump, just a little tap, and fix that audio level. The nice part here is that, you know, Lisa, as our producer back there, she can plug headphones directly into the mixer and get that audio mix and make sure that at least at the board, it's working. We can see the meters on the board. The other thing is that we have much better control on a mixer like that over gain, frequency, and fine-tuning things for ambient noise that we might be picking up, someone's voice, any of those different pieces, being able to make those adjustments on the fly, if necessary, to work with that. I think a mixer is hugely important in any studio environment. They're not a big investment in the grand scheme of things compared to a lot of the other equipment.
Yeah, you can get like a 4-channel mixer for under $200, no problem.
Exactly.
Right?
And it just gives you that extra piece of flexibility. Now, that being said, I'm a big fan of the, keep it simple, stupid. Try to minimize as many moving parts as possible, because you don't want these different pieces to go down. But an audio mixer, I don't really lump into that same category as excessive splitters, switchers, and everything else. I think that it is a valuable tool that can really increase the level of production. Some people are talking about larger interviews, right? If you just need to have someone adjusting levels in a mixed interview where one person talks louder than the other, you got to be able to just quickly do that, and
right.
the mixer will let you do that.
Absolutely.
Or if you're doing a larger interview and there's a Q&A session, a mic out in the audience, people asking questions don't know how to use a microphone properly, so they might not have it close enough.
Right up to the mouth, or too
maybe
far
it's
away.
too close. So there, you need to be able to adjust for that, and a mixer lets you do that, provided that you have an experienced operator who can do that on the fly.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a big part of it.
There's something else I wanted to talk about, though, with audio, and this is something that certainly you're going to want to test for, and that is your audio sync, your AV sync. And this is a topic that we've covered a number of times on our live show here at Epiphan, but especially when your audio and your video are on 2 different signal paths, they may not be arriving at your streaming solution at the same time.
Yeah.
Can you describe that issue a little bit?
Yeah, so maybe that's one knock against the C100, as much as I love it as a general camera. One knock against it is that its video output is always delayed.
It's slow.
By about 120, 150 milliseconds. Our audio path is much faster. So we have to make delay adjustments in our encoder to realign them.
Right, so we put about 150 millisecond delay on the C100 so that it will, a delay 150 milliseconds on our audio path so that it will arrive late at the same time as our video.
Exactly. Now, people will argue about whether audio coming before or after the video, which is more noticeable, which is more annoying. I'm not going to get into that because that's a personal thing. But in any case, we want it to be synced. I mean,
as closely as possible.
Right, and that could be a challenge. We know that even running audio through a camera sometimes will break the sync itself. Different cameras will do things a little bit differently. But audio is critical. The quality of the audio is super important. And you know, yeah, there's a lot of components to that. Making sure that those pieces are there.
Now, can I show something quick here?
Yeah,
this is a cool little sync test that we posted here on the Epiphan YouTube page, and I'll play it just for a moment. This is a way to actually test if your audio and video are in sync. And
audio is critical.
Oh, I'm hearing our feedback. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, get rid of our live stream.
I'll mute our audio and we'll go to, here we go. So the idea here is what you would do is you would stream a test pattern like this. And then at the end of your stream, you would go and watch your stream or watch your recording, and you would be able to verify that the beep is actually happening when the line is horizontal. Now, if your beep is early, and you can test and see how early it is. You could pull this into editing software and check to see
where
that beep is happening. So if your audio is early, you might make an adjustment. If your audio is late, you might make an adjustment. And this will give you some indication. Yeah. So if you go on the Epiphan YouTube page and type in AV sync test pattern, and there's other test patterns you can find on YouTube as well. Go find one, give it a test. Yeah. That's going to be a great way to actually, now, one tip that I have is if you are going to do testing for your audio sync, make sure that your testing methodology is correct. I was listening to a test pattern using Bluetooth headphones, and the headphones themselves are delayed, right? Yeah. So how am I going to actually make an accurate review of AV sync if my tools that I'm testing with are not properly calibrated? So anyway, it's there for you. We won't get too deep into that, but there are ways to test your audio and to make sure that your AV is in sync.
Now, that being said, we're talking about the bulletproof studio idea here. So hopefully you only have to do this once.
Exactly.
Because you're not going to be changing your camera and audio a lot. You could do this once, set it, and you shouldn't have to mess with it.
Set it and forget it.
And so for studio, that is definitely, you know, do that during your setup and hopefully never have to worry too much about it again. Coming back to, we were talking about environment, we covered a lot of the audio stuff in that environment. We were talking about noise, you know, but again, that's, people can do the clap thing, right? If I clap and I hear a massive echo, I got a problem. I need to look at that dampening and bring things down a little bit. You know, you don't want that tinny sound, which is usually what happens from a little bit of echo or just sound bouncing around. That's super annoying. At the same time, I think there is a point where things are too dead as well, where just you sound like you're maybe in an isolation room, and it's weird.
In those cases, what you can do is add even a second microphone, a little further away in the room. In some cases, it's possible to mix, you know, a lav mic with a shotgun mic.
But that's why to have the mixer again, so you can adjust those independent levels from those different microphones.
Yeah. So your microphone that's further away is for sort of your room noise and your resonance, and you know, you can adjust that on the fly and create a little bit more of that room scale effect.
Yeah, exactly.
With that, we are going to open it up. If you do have any questions about audio, now's the time to put them into chat. We'll give a moment here, but we're probably going to go to our next topic very soon. Yeah. So we'll just see. Does anyone have any questions? Doesn't look like it.
Not a question, but Tank RC had a great one here. To retain audience participation, audio is a must. Video can be bad, but if audio is bad, people, you know, they're not going to stick around. And that's a great point. Absolutely. You know, people are more willing to forgive weird video errors or glitches, but bad audio, crackling, or anything like that, people tune out pretty quickly when the audio is really bad. So that's definitely you know, a big one.
Yeah, it's often the biggest giveaway of let's call it low production value is when someone has that great shot, but they don't have the audio to match. So people are willing to tolerate, you know, poor lighting more than they're willing to tolerate poor audio.
Saul has a question here. What about phase cancellation from multiple open microphones?
That would be a great question for Mathieu. So if you are watching, Mathieu, jump into chat. But my understanding with phase cancellation is that often reducing the number of microphones you have is a good way to deal with that. You might be able to make some adjustments on a mixer as well. If George and I were standing even closer, I'd be picking up on his mic more. We actually probably have some phase issues now.
We might, yeah. We're trying to, make sure there's enough separation there. But yeah, it definitely.
Vess is asking if we can switch to the shotgun mic so we can hear the distance. I think we could probably do that. Do we want to try doing that for just a moment, Lisa? Could you turn up the volume on our shotgun mic?
I think it's just muted, so we might have to mute the two lavs, and then you want to just go mute the two lavs and then unmute the shotgun, and I'll center myself and try to talk into
this one's the shotgun.
Talk into the shotgun here.
And I'll just bring it up slowly. I'm going to bring down the lavs.
Okay. So basically centered on that shotgun right now. So it basically is just up above me here. I don't want to move it too much, but I'll try to drag it into frame ever so slightly, just above my head there.
We can tilt it towards you as well. That'll help.
But basically, the nice part with a shotgun is, again, within a fixed studio environment like this, you can get a perfect positioning with that shotgun, as we normally do on our weekly show, that kind of just blasts this area, right? Now, that being said, a shotgun's not great for all environments. A lot of people like to look at it in terms of shooting across a big room. That's not always the best case. You're probably better off with lavs, just because you're going to pick up all the ambient noise.
You're going to pick up everything that happens between you and that mic and your subject. So the other thing is with a shotgun, and I've noticed this with our live show, if I turn over here to do something you see, you can't hear me anymore, right? So it's very directional and it's very focused. If I, have to look back here or check my notes, all of a sudden I'm more quiet. So shotgun mic is not going to be as reliable in situations where your talent or your subject is moving.
If you're moving, if, let's say, coming back to that example earlier of a bigger set interview style, right? If someone just shifts in their chair and turns the wrong way, or, they just have a weird body position compared to how you aimed that microphone, you might not be getting it as well. And that's a good argument for looking at desktop mics like this.
Let's go back to our lavs just to make sure that we sound good for everyone. We bring those back up now. We can remove the shotgun now. Yeah, you can mute it. Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So a desk mic like this, can be another option. It's going to have a little bit more range, but you still have to be pretty close, right? I mean, this is the Blue Yeti. This is one of the most popular microphones on the internet, if you will. Pretty much every podcaster in their basement has a Blue Yeti that they're using. And it's good, but again, you want to be within a certain distance from it, because if I tried to put this on the ceiling, it's just not going to pick us up. So
now this does have some options. You can change the pickup pattern. So I can say I want the pickup pattern to be on this side of the mic only, or I can say I can want it to be omnidirectional pickup pattern, or if you're maybe doing some closer voice work, you can switch it to a cardioid pattern so that it's designed for voiceover. So it really a little bit of flexibility there.
Yeah, the desk mics like this can be very flexible for sure. Our other cardioid mic got borrowed, so we actually don't have it here. But it got borrowed by one of our employees to do some music recording. So yeah, I mean, again, I think that plays into environment a lot. I think by far, to sum up that, the most flexible option I think is always going to be the lav in terms of reliability and flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so with that, let's move on from audio, and now we wanted to jump into, we've got lots of video sources with our cameras, we've got lots of audio sources with our mics, the lighting environment. Now what do we do?
Well, live stream it, obviously.
Yeah. Well, before you can live stream all of those sources, you got to do some switching first. So George, give me the quick and dirty. What is switching?
So switching, basically, you're changing between your different inputs. So now, obviously, if you have a single camera setup, you might not be doing a lot of switching. But let's go over what we've seen so far today that we've used. 2 cameras, so that's at least a couple switches there. Some title screens for our index cards and our different section headers. So that's a few more switches. Being able to, you know, just go to our picture-in-picture with your laptop share.
Yeah.
Bringing in other content.
Yes, graphics, web pages, presentations, and PowerPoints.
All those different pieces. The more stuff we can bring into a live stream, more content we have, the more interesting and engaging it's going to be for people. People get bored just staring at a person sitting and staring at one fixed camera without any changes to it. Being able to have a little more dynamic content to it is going to be more engaging. And certainly in a studio environment, there's no reason not to do that.
So if you want to be able to switch between 2 cameras, how do you do that, George?
So we've covered this in some of our live shows, but I think maybe we'll quickly go over it. One way would be something like this guy that I know a lot of our customers have bought after us talking about it and have had good success with this. This is the Ravesun HDMI switcher.
This camera here.
Yeah, I'll walk around.
Oh, it's right here.
Okay, perfect. There we go. This one is a 2-input switcher, and it also has its own built-in picture-in-picture options and stuff like that. So it can take in 2 HDMI inputs and have 1 HDMI output. And basically the switching is really simple. There's different buttons on the front to just do those switching. This is very basic and rudimentary.
Yeah, that's a cheap switcher, but it works.
It's like $40 or something.
Yeah.
Very inexpensive.
Now the downside with something this inexpensive is, you know, first of all, is manual buttons right on here that I don't have any way of doing that remotely, and
they make noise.
I don't know if you hear that, they make a lot of noise.
Yeah, they're not great. There are certainly much more sophisticated video switchers than this. For example, you could go to something that a ton of our viewers often bring up, you know, that's maybe a jump in price, but also a massive jump in capability, and that is something like the Roland V1. So
I actually have it here. We can go to picture-in-picture and show it a bit.
Bring up the picture-in-picture here. Something like the Roland V1 is going to give you a much more traditional broadcast style switcher. So you're going to have things like the little T-bar, you can control your fade. You know, there's different just punch-ins here. And this has 4 inputs and some outputs. It's a very small unit. They're very cool. And there's some different transitions and stuff you can do with these. And these guys can take in some different video signals and stuff like that. But I think the last time I checked, I'd have to check on the pricing again, but you're talking about a pretty significant increase in price from something like the Ravesun to something like the Roland. But if you are definitely very interested in that much more traditional broadcast style of switching, you know, if you have a producer or tech who's really loves that T-bar, you know, then I've known lots of people who are obsessed with that. You know, if they don't have that T-bar, they're not interested. You know, that can be a great tool.
Now, one factor when you're using a switcher, though, is with some switchers, what you want to watch for is your signal compatibility, right?
Absolutely.
If you have one camera that's on 60 frames a second and another camera that's 30 frames a second, you might have some issues.
The biggest one being progressive versus interlaced.
Okay.
And I'm going to say this right out. We're talking about live streaming today.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, right away, I'm going to say, take any notion of using an interlaced signal and throw it out the window.
Yeah.
This is a little bit of a controversial topic for some of our European viewers, but we're not talking about television broadcast. I don't care that the television broadcast standard in Europe is interlaced. We're talking about live streaming on the internet. Live streaming on the internet in interlaced signals looks bad. It is not good. It just doesn't, interlaced signals don't compress well, and you're going to compress to do live streaming. You're typically looking at lower frame rates, 30 FPS instead of 50. So the interlacing is more noticeable, especially post-compression. So you definitely, in my opinion, want to be working in a progressive workflow. However, you might have a secondary camera that's interlaced only, and that's okay, you know, as maybe a B cam. But if your switcher has to have all matching signals. And I don't want to throw any particular company under the bus, but there are companies out there that some of their very popular older switchers, all the signals have to match. If one is interlaced, they all have to be interlaced. And they don't do their own scaling or their own deinterlacing or anything like that. They have to match. And that really brings down your production overall. So making sure that you have something that's flexible with multiple signal types or is capable of scaling on its own output and resampling it is great. So the Roland seems to be a great option for that. I would argue that for a studio environment, it is still inexpensive.
Can I just point out that I think our equipment works really well as far as switchers when you're using something with maybe two sources, something like the Pearl Mini, great switching features.
Well, I was going to get to that in saying that we're talking about that and we're still pre-encode.
Yeah.
So you're still talking about adding an encoder after that. So in many cases, you know, and we're not going to be shy about the fact that we're going to mention our own gear here, but one of the things of Pearl Mini or Pearl 2 like we use in our studio here, one of the purposes of using an all-in-one device is it simplifies everything. It removes the complexity of multiple pieces. You can do everything on one box. So Pearl Mini can do your switching between a couple of inputs, and it can do your audio. In fact, with Pearl Mini, you can run microphones directly off of it, so you don't need an amp and a premixer. And Pearl 2 is a bit different, but you know, you could have someone doing all of your switching right on this big 7-inch touchscreen on the front of it, and that could really simplify it, especially for an environment where your producer, operator, person, let's call her Lisa, if that person isn't as experienced as Lisa is, like we're lucky that we have someone who, you know, knows what they're doing back there, but if it's someone who you just go, hey, man, I just need you to jump in here and run the show for me while I'm doing it, using something like the Roland could be very overwhelming because it is complicated. It's much more traditional broadcast. Something like Pearl is much more visual. It shows you thumbnails, you preview them, and you go live. Very straightforward.
Now, what about I think we should probably keep things moving along here.
Yeah.
We are going a bit long on this webinar. Thanks for everyone who's stuck with us this long. I hope that you're finding the information useful. But we should jump along. We're going to move on from switching. If you have more questions about switching, we'll get to them at the end. But let's jump in now to streaming.
So that really is where we start to talk about encoders. And again, when we're talking about something like the Pearl Mini or the Pearl 2 or even the Webcaster X2, that's doing our encoding for us. You don't have to use a dedicated piece of hardware to do your encoding. Someone earlier had mentioned OBS as a mixer switcher and the output to X2 as a question. And Stefan, could you do that? Yeah. Would I? I'm not sure I would. I would probably invest in either a Raveson or a Roland and use that instead, because you're overcomplicating it by using a Windows or a Mac-based laptop that probably costs more than the Roland did, and running software that could be unreliable on a computer that could be unreliable.
Could I just point out that even before our show today, we had a laptop that kind of got sick.
Well, we break our own rules all the time, and part of that is because our studio is an experiment. And so we have a laptop sitting over there running vMix, so it's a great example of what Stefan's talking about with OBS. We use it so that I can do this with your questions. It links into vMix Social. It gives us a chroma keyed output that we can bring your questions up on screen and then make them disappear automatically. Great handy little tool. Totally necessary.
But running on Windows, we had some Windows updates overnight.
Yeah.
The laptop didn't like those updates,
basically
so it went into a power cycle.
Yeah, it was dead.
And we almost couldn't do our comments today because of a laptop, right? So
we luckily got it back up 5 minutes before we went on air. That's not cool.
Yeah, that's not fail-proof.
That's unreliable. That is completely against what we've been discussing today. So again, reliability-wise, would I say let's use a Windows laptop to do switching into another encoder? You could, but I wouldn't say...
Not fail-proof, though.
It's not fail-proof at all.
It's much less fail-proof than a hardware-based solution that is designed for a single purpose.
Exactly. So encoding-wise, you know, there's a few components to that. Streaming-wise, there's a few things we need to look at. Number one is your bandwidth. Now, if you're setting up a studio, hopefully you have, in a perfect world, a dedicated internet connection to what you're going to be doing for streaming.
And not only a dedicated internet connection, but a dedicated network, perhaps, that you have your encoder set up on.
Yeah.
If you have an office network and everybody's using it, you know, someone opens up someone's uploading files to a server or something, and all of a sudden...
Actually, it happened here once a couple of years ago, early on, when we were trying to run a live streaming event from the office, and this was before we had set up a dedicated VLAN with protected bandwidth on our network, which is what we do here. We have one big chunk on our internet connection, and a big piece of that is carved out into a specific VLAN
for the
studio, period, and it's protected. No one can infringe on that dedicated bandwidth that we have unless the entire internet connection goes down. But early on, what happened is we didn't have that protection. It's just wide open, everyone's sharing the same bandwidth, no protections. And one of our engineers went to download a Linux distribution using a torrent client, which is totally legit. It's how most Linux distributions are distributed. And because of that, it can create so many connections and download so much data at one time. It completely killed all the bandwidth we had available, and our stream went down.
The stream went down, probably, right?
Exactly. And so reliability is key, as with all of this. So knowing your bandwidth, number one. Protecting your bandwidth, number two. You know, for us in the studio, we carve about 30 meg for just this studio. Do we need all 30 meg all the time? No.
Right now we're using 8 meg.
Yeah. But when those of you who watch our weekly show know sometimes we do it in 4K, we do it to YouTube, Facebook, and sometimes Twitch all simultaneously, we are using 30 when we do that. And so we need to be aware of what our workflow is going to be, what our platforms are, resolutions, and so on. So that's a big part.
Now, of course, when we're talking about reliable, fail-proof networking, we're talking about hardwired internet. We're not talking about Wi-Fi, right?
Right. Now, this will be a big argument as well. Some people say, nah, my Wi-Fi is great, I got this. But there's so many things.
A microwave can cause your Wi-Fi network
someone making their lunch all of a sudden generates more interference, and you know, your Wi-Fi gets a little spotty. You know, cell phone signals, all these things can cause interference. And so if we're talking about bulletproof reliability, wired Ethernet is going to be your bulletproof possibility. So, you know, that's a big one to definitely look at in terms of let's run wires, let's tape them to the floor, as we talked about earlier. Let's ideally either have a dedicated internet connection or at least a dedicated chunk of bandwidth on a VLAN separate from everything else. And get that set up.
Now we do have a couple questions coming in. Let's maybe just try to answer one or two quickly. We do want to keep this moving along because I know this has gone longer than we expected, so thank you everybody for sticking with us. And a question again from Tim Trott Productions.
What's the absolute minimum? I assume you mean absolute minimum bandwidth to do live streaming. That's a variable. What resolution do you want to stream at? Let's just assume for a moment 1080p. If you want to stream 1080p to YouTube, YouTube's preferred minimum bit rate for that would be 5 megabit, 5,000 kilobit per second. The minimum upload speed on your internet connection you would need, minimum, in order to run that stable, bare minimum, I would say would be 6 meg. Ideally, more like 7.5 or 8 meg, in order to make sure you have enough headroom, because bandwidth always
fluctuates.
Varies. Always, always. I don't care whether it's cable, DSL, fiber, it doesn't matter. There's always variation there, more so if it's a shared network where people are doing other things. So our general rule of thumb, and we have a great infographic about this in our blog posts months ago, the general minimum rule of thumb we recommend is take your bit rate, multiply it by 1.5, that's the minimum upload speed you should have for that. Now you can extrapolate that down. Again, 1080p to YouTube, expects 5 megabit. If you're doing 720p to Facebook, you can probably get away with 2 or 3 megabit. So again, you can apply the same math to that. The content type plays a role. We talked about this a while ago where
if you don't have a moving camera, it's a
Yeah.
lot easier to get a quality image out of a
Exactly.
lower bit rate. If you have a camera that's panning and maybe some sports happening in front of you,
higher frame rate, higher action means higher bit rate, because otherwise you're going to see compression artifacting. It's just going to be ugly. We could actually get away with probably less than we do here.
yeah, we're
because
using
it's
8 meg.
static.
This is an 8 meg stream right now. We could definitely be doing a 4 meg stream, and I'm sure it would look almost as good
Yeah.
in this environment. We do have another quick question here from Stefan Lutka. The Pearl looks good. Is it possible to use with Skype broadcast meeting? This is kind of like a switching question almost, going back to switching a little bit.
I guess the basic is, does Pearl integrate directly with Skype? No.
No.
Is it possible to bring in a Skype guest into a Pearl in order to live stream the interview? Yes, we've done that a number of times on our weekly live show.
So you're running Skype on a laptop, and you're just
take the
taking
output.
that source and cropping it into your video.
Just bringing it into something like Pearl or another switcher, whatever you're using, creating a picture-in-picture, some crops if you can, to clean it up and bring it in that way. So yeah, it is possible as a workflow. It just requires a few extra little pieces. That being said, and again, let's be open here that there are software packages out there. If you want to run a stream from a piece of software, both Wirecast and vMix have Skype integration options where you can do a call within the actual application itself to bring in that remote guest. Again, I don't know that I would personally feel that's the most reliable path, because you're adding extra load to the system. And in any case, when you're doing a software-based encoding setup for your streaming, if you're doing it on a computer, that's going to have to be a pretty powerful machine in order to really do it well. Otherwise, you could be running into performance issues. And performance issues translate very effectively into the live stream, whether it's dropping frames or whatever the case may be. There's some guys on YouTube that I really like to watch. They do a car review channel. I love watching their normal stuff because they have time to produce it in post. It's great. But every week they do a live streamed podcast. They're basically just guys sitting on a couch, just talking about whatever. But they use a laptop running OBS to do that stream, and because they're running so much on this kind of older, beat up laptop, it's constantly dropping frames, and it drives me crazy. Could it help if I remember one of their shows, they didn't plug power into their laptop, and so the laptop throttled down to a low power mode, which caused it to drop frames like crazy. That's not reliable to me.
This is again why you would choose hardware solutions over software-based solutions. Now we do have, we do have one more section we want to cover here. We are coming up on 90 minutes, so I think we should probably try to, so Ghost VJ Productions, we're gonna just cover a little bit more material, and then we'll get, or Ghost JV Productions, I apologize. We're gonna get to your question in just a moment, so stick with us. The final thing that we wanted to cover here was other equipment and considerations. So is there anything else that we would recommend for a fail-proof studio? Now, one of the things that we recommend is actually a confidence monitor, and I'm gonna have to turn this camera around once again to show.
You can flip that one around. But while Dan's flipping that around, you'll notice we have a couple of laptops up here. This is a great other equipment piece. So not only do we have that, gonna get that great infinite look. It's awesome.
Twilight Zone.
Yeah, but not only do we have that confidence monitor for the talent, if you can call us that, but we see ourselves. We know when Lisa does a switch as a result. We can bring our content up there if we need to read something, almost like a teleprompter. Not quite, but kind of similar. So it gives us a flexible piece to know what's happening. We can make sure we're in frame so that I'm not just wandering off over here and getting cut off, right? I know that I need to be in frame.
I would say it's almost critical to have a confidence monitor in your studio, because it helps you know what the viewer sees at that exact moment. Even if I'm monitoring the stream, like I'm watching the stream on my laptop right here, but because of the way that YouTube works, there is a slight delay, and I can't see what's happening until about 30 seconds later.
Exactly. It's not a great way to monitor yourself.
So
I would argue also, ours is too small.
yeah, we should probably have something a little easier to see.
I would rather have at least 32 to 40 inch TV there just to help. And it's also, I will say, it's also a helpful tool to keep the presenter or the talent's eyes on the camera. If you have a single fixed camera mounted behind it, they're looking at that screen is basically looking at a camera if you position it right. So that it helps quite a lot, speaking from someone doing
Any other critical equipment? I mean, we use laptops here. That's
so I'm
pretty
monitoring
standard.
chat on this one. You've been monitoring chat and bringing up different content over there, like web pages and everything else.
Yeah, we wanted to show things, right?
Exactly.
So a laptop's a great way to do that. It's just another HDMI source. I want to show a presentation. I want to show, a web page. Something comes up in chat that we didn't think about, but we want to be able to engage with that piece of information and maybe show something. That's where your laptop comes in.
Playing a video clip from something. You never know, especially if you're doing an open presentation. You never know what's going to come up. Having a computer available within that mix means that you can throw things in there on the fly, or bringing in guests. Someone had mentioned that earlier. Bringing guests from anything.
We could open up a Skype call on this laptop right now and then crop it in and have a guest here right now.
It would be pretty easy.
But let's keep things moving. There's one more section we wanted to just very quickly cover. We won't spend too much time on it, but it is content. It is what you're...
So we've built a studio.
Yeah.
We've selected awesome cameras.
Yes.
We've got our
Reliable
audio tuned. Everything sounds good in our room.
Good lighting.
Bouncing. Sounds good. We've set up some great lighting. We've got our 7.3 zone lighting set up. Everything looks cool. We have awesome furniture, and we've set up a great encoder, whatever encoder we might choose. Hopefully it's a Pearl 2. We've set that up. We know our bandwidth. We know our network. We've got it all going. Now the question is, what are we even streaming?
Yeah, I think the big thing with content is, and the recommendation that I would give, you want to be fail-proof, is pre-production. Spend more time than you think planning for your production. George and I did a rehearsal of this entire webinar yesterday. It was just us talking to ourselves, so it wasn't as fun as this, but it was pretty critical for us to actually know the information we want to cover today. And we do that regularly. We make sure that we're ad-libbing here, obviously, but we do have notes and we do have some scripts.
We have bullets. And this, for me, is probably one of the biggest things is, we had, what was this, four pages of scripted bullet points, so that we can help keep on track, but it reminds me not to miss something. And that's a big piece.
Another tip is often what we do is we'll actually tape our bullet point notes right at the bottom of the confidence monitor or right underneath the camera so we can review our notes. Today we've probably been looking down at our pages quite a bit. Honestly, it's probably not the best looking thing when we do that, but often what you can do is just put your notes on a cue card right under your camera. Another thing that's important with content, interactivity. Why are you live if you're not interacting? We've tried to encourage people to be active in chat, and we've seen you guys doing that today, and your questions are huge. If you're not planning on doing anything interactive, if you're not planning on monitoring chat, you might as well just be doing your video on demand.
Just record it, edit it, throw it up on YouTube. Don't worry about it.
The other thing is, we have found certainly that when you're creating live content, the audience is much more forgiving. Little mistakes, no big deal. Roll with the punches.
It's live.
It's live. That's why people are watching it. Is because they want to feel like they're there with you. They want to engage with you in a much more unfiltered way. So those little mistakes, that honestly, it doesn't really hurt the quality of what the content is. If anything, it makes you more human. So, as far as content goes, I think the big things are plan, practice. Spend a little bit of time doing rehearsals, spend a little bit of time organizing yourself before you go live, but also just really making sure that you interact with your audience and create that conversation. Anything else we would give tips content-wise?
Well, obviously promotion's a big thing, right? It takes a while to build an audience. We're still building ours on our weekly live show constantly. And the best way to do that is obviously to promote through social media. So make sure that you have social media accounts for every relevant platform where you want to find
cross-posting is huge.
Exactly. So
making sure that you promote your stream before you go live. If you only promote your stream,
Facebook, whatever, you need to find the audience.
Yeah.
We don't really use Instagram because what we do is not, Instagram's so based around pictures, and that's not really where we're necessarily going to find our audience for a lot of what we discuss. So we don't necessarily cross-post to Instagram, let's say, sometimes, maybe. But Facebook is a big draw for us. So we want to make sure we're all over that.
Take advantage. That's your reach, right? Is
Exactly.
the different networks. So that's how you reach your audience. Another tip in terms of promotion, we talked about cross-posting a bit, but giving people a regular schedule for your streams. If people know when to, consistency is so key. If people know that every day at Thursday afternoon that you go live, or every Friday at 5 p.m. you go live, they expect it. It becomes much more easier for them to consume your content if they know what to expect.
Well, one of the best examples of that is, a lot of people are starting to become aware of Twitch, right? Although it's still primarily a gaming platform, and that's fair. But one of the reasons why Twitch is becoming so popular is that it is so easy to monetize and make some money. Well, you have to be a partner in order to do that. To become a Twitch partner, you have to stream a minimum number of days per week for a minimum amount of time. So and it has to be consistent. You can't do it 1 week, get partnership, and then not do it the next week. It has to be each and every week, or you could risk losing the partnership, which would close your access to the monetization.
And the reason for that really is that it has been shown that the consistency is how you build an audience. It's how you get people to come back and view your content again.
Yeah.
So with that, I think we've really, one other thing we would just say for content is that even after your stream ends, there's still a little bit of work to be done.
Yeah.
You can go back and promote the video as video on demand. Best practices, especially places like YouTube, is taking advantage of SEO. You can use tagging,
thumbnails. Thumbnails is a big one.
I would say thumbnails is critical. No one's going to click on your video if your thumbnail is no good.
I'm not saying do clickbait.
No, and you don't have to be a professional graphic designer, although we're fortunate enough here that we have a great designer here who, Lisa, helps us with all of our thumbnails and make sure our thumbnails are always looking very clickable. But in many cases, there's web pages that you can go to that will help you auto-generate thumbnails, easy tools to create thumbnails.
Exactly. So and logos and everything else, just to make sure you have a more polished. People are going to be more likely to engage.
And I find those little bits of polish, those little things that just elevate the production value a bit, make a big difference.
It does.
Okay.
It does.
It's the first impression. It's how people are going to receive your content. It's like you're going to brush your teeth before you go on a date, right?
But at the same time, I think it's an unrealistic expectation to think that you're going to go viral on your first live stream and be, Jake Paul.
No, you're gonna have three people. One's going to be your mom.
Exactly.
You've got to just build that consistency.
Exactly.
For sure.
So take your time. I think if you're doing it because you think it's going to be an overnight sensation, that's probably not true, except the fact it's going to take time to build an audience. And just grow with it, learn new things, and grow with it, and that's a big part of content. And again, as Dan said, the more pre-production you can do to make sure your content is interesting and engaging is better for sure. So
I think we've covered pretty much everything right now. So now we actually wanted to open it up. We have gone way over time. I'm getting another indication that we went long. Thank you for everyone who stuck with us. We do want to open the floor, open-ended Q&A. If you have questions about anything we talked about, or comments, or just you want to share some of your experience, we'd love to hear.
A couple queued up here that I'm going to go through.
Sure.
So first one was from Ghost JV Productions, the one we kind of said we'd answer later. Does Pearl 2 encode with H.265 HEVC and then transcode it to H.264? No. Pearl 2 is currently based entirely around H.264 only. That may change in the future, but today it's based entirely on H.264. Iris has a question here that I queued up as well. Can you use Pearl to streamline for YouTube and Facebook? In terms of streaming to those two platforms simultaneously even, absolutely. Pearl Mini or Pearl 2 can do that very easily and can make that a great tool in a streaming studio in order to reach multiple platforms at the same time. And the Tank RC answered that at the same time. And I queued that up because I just wanted to show it to people. Simultaneously live stream to YouTube, Facebook, and any other content delivery network or management system. Essentially, anywhere that can ingest an RTMP stream, which is very wide-ranging. A Pearl can help do that, which is a great tool. Yeah, so let's see. Any other questions, guys? Please throw them in there.
Bradley, John Eaglefeather, thank you. I hope that this has been informative. We certainly covered a lot of ground today. We tried not to go too deep on any one topic because it all matters, and we wanted to try to give you as much relevant information as possible.
A great tip that I think I would throw out at this point, because it seems super relevant, is we thought we would do this in an hour.
We're already 100 minutes. So.
Yeah, give yourself more time than you think it's going to be, because especially if you think and are hoping for really good engagement, as wonderful it is, causes delays. So you need to have some buffer around that. Be accepting of the fact that it might be an hour and 10 minutes or whatever, instead of the hour or whatever. I mean, our weekly live show, for those of you who watch it, original goal for that show was to never exceed 15 minutes. We've hit 45, 50 minutes almost
pretty regularly
recently. And I don't feel bad about that, because our content is better as a result.
No, and I think in many cases people are now more accepting of longer form content, as what a lot of people are looking for is a greater sort of depth of information. So in many cases that does work. Saul is asking a question.
Yeah, any plans for Pearl 2 to have more SDI inputs and outputs for more durable connectors? There are currently no plans to change the physical hardware on Pearl 2. That would probably be a Pearl 3 and whenever the future might hold that, but there are no currently any plans to change the physical interface on Pearl 2.
If there's any final thoughts, any final questions, now's the time. If not, we do want to thank you for joining us today. We had a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
This went fairly well, I'd say.
Yeah, once again, I apologize. My voice is not 100% today, but it was a good time last night at that concert. So it was a lot of fun. And so maybe our final takeaway, Dan, I'm going to ask you the big question.
Okay.
We've now done nearly 70 live shows.
Wow.
And tomorrow is?
I think it's 68 or something.
So we're getting close. What is the biggest number one lesson that you feel we've learned in doing those live shows that you went?
Studio related or just in general?
Studio related, in terms of that was not as reliable as it should have been.
Yeah, I would say the biggest overall tip is give yourself more time than you expect, because things go wrong. As much as you plan, it doesn't matter. Things will go wrong.
Yeah.
We had the same thing today. A laptop had a Windows update. You can never plan for that. You can't control that. But you can try to mitigate that. And how you do that is by having backup plan in place, being able to roll with the punches, being flexible, and understanding your setup. If you give yourself more time before you're going live, these problems are easy to solve usually. It just takes 10 minutes sometimes. But if you're trying to get it all done 5 minutes before you go live, that's when you're going to run into problems. So I'd say that would be probably my biggest tip.
For me, I think it's similar, but I think it comes down to manpower.
Or woman power.
Person power.
Person power.
Basically, having a co-host in order to have a more engaging conversation with, I think is hugely critical. It's very difficult to generate content as an individual by yourself. Just being one guy talking to a camera is not easy. Being able to bounce things off someone else makes it more engaging, makes it more interesting for the viewers. At the same time, could Dan and I do this, just the two of us, and do all the switching that we've been doing? No. The power behind the magic, the wizard behind the curtain, is Lisa, who's doing our switching and managing things in terms of starting and stopping the stream and doing that switching. So this is a 3-person show, and I think that is probably what you really want to aim towards, is to make sure that you have someone who's being a director, a producer, as well as your talent in front of the camera.
I mean, having a team is huge. If you can just even have one person helping you so that you're not responsible for everything on your own, you're going to have a lot more success. Anything else? Any other questions coming in?
Yeah, one that's not directly related, but it is a good question. And Bradley, maybe this is one that would be good to take to our forums on our website and talk about that. But he's just bringing up any ideas on how to deal with the YouTube and Facebook's algorithm muting live streaming when doing live music. That is a big topic. It's one that Facebook themselves is working on signing contracts. You were just looking at that.
Actually, I have an article here. This is recently on TechCrunch, but you know, I've experienced this as well. You go, you do a stream, and then all of a sudden it's removed because there was copyright music playing in the background. Well, Facebook has recognized that this is an issue, and they are working on it. Their goal is to get some copyright for a wide range of popular music so that it's covered under Facebook's blanket. We just lost Joy.
Yeah.
The stream has gone so long that
My
we just
battery
lost.
died. Here is the downside to using wireless labs.
Yeah.
Batteries.
But we are coming back up on the shotgun mic,
Yes.
so I think we
Thank
should
you,
be
thank
okay.
you, Tank.
I mean, you can probably hear George a bit on my mic as well.
But yes, the batteries died. Apparently 2 bars is not enough for
No.
thank you for noticing that. Yeah, so Dan was pulling that up. To Bradley's thing, I don't think YouTube is going to change anytime soon. That it's a constant battle when it comes to copyright infringement, and a platform like Facebook or YouTube as a big entity is so open to lawsuits around copyright that they are going to have pretty much a zero tolerance, and you have to expect that. So yeah, now I know with YouTube, after the fact, you can go back and make claims to reinstate it if you prove that you have a license to distribute the content.
Yeah. You can also allow them to monetize your content, which means they'll put ads on your content, but they'll let you keep it there. That may not be something you want to do, but it is there.
Or you have to hand over all your revenue.
Yeah, exactly.
No, so yeah, that's a tough one. Like I say, Facebook is working on it. They have some stuff out there. Even Twitch has run into that recently. They used to be the wild, wild west of music and everything like that, and a number of people have started facing lawsuits and copyright claims over that as well. So, Brad, that's an ongoing battle. That's always a tough one. The number one thing to do is don't.
Yeah, I mean, try not to have, we talked about your studio environment. Try to make sure your environment is isolated from, you know.
And if the studio has music, if you're using intro music or outro music, as we sometimes do, make sure it's open. It's not copyrighted. Don't use the Rolling Stones.
Yeah. Any other quick questions coming in? I think that pretty much covers it. So the key takeaways for those of you guys who are still with us, we talked a lot about reliability today. I mean, we want to plug our products as well. If you're looking for reliable hardware-based solutions for many of the things we're talking about, Pearl family of products. I mean, the Pearl Mini, brand new. It's been shipping for a couple weeks now, but this thing is pretty badass. I mean, it'll do all your switching, recording, streaming. It has XLR microphone inputs with phantom power, so you don't have to use a mixer with this.
If you don't want to.
If you don't want to. So Pearl Mini's great. Pearl 2, obviously the big brother.
Bigger brother, more robust in terms of inputs, selection of inputs.
Many inputs,
but it's designed more for a studio environment, so it's really expecting a mixer in front of it, as it has line level inputs and things like that. So, but it definitely has more power, so you can do more recording, more streaming, all from one box. It can essentially act like 6 different HD encoders all on one piece of hardware.
Very powerful.
And so that makes a big difference.
So since we've covered so much today, want to thank you all for being with us. Want to thank you for your participation. Catch up with us again tomorrow. I think Stefan was asking what's the show about tomorrow. We're going to be talking about AI for video. A very interesting topic.
Yes.
Very 2018 news topic. But also, if you want to keep in touch with us, you can always go to epiphan.com. All the information there. We've got an incredible blog there for you to follow all of these topics.
The forum.
The forum, the Epiphan forum. The Epiphan blog is such a great resource of information.
Subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook, and do all of those things. And keep in touch with everything that's happening in the social world with Epiphan, and always tune into the show. We do it every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern, and we are always covering a variety of topics, many of which we've covered today as well in individual separate shows. So you can go back through that back catalog and look at, in some cases, a little more in-depth technical description of some of the things we discussed today. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and hopefully we'll do one of these in the future, and hopefully you'll join us then.
Until then, I'm Dan.
I'm George.
I'll see you guys later. Have a great day.